We're now being joined by Mr. Wahab Shitu, a legal practitioner, to look at the fallout of the Bayelsa governorship elections. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Shitu.
It's my pleasure.
Now, another inconclusive election, but apart from the word inconclusive, is there any similarity between the election in Bayelsa and the one in Kogi?
Well, the similarity appears to be in the fact that both elections were declared inconclusive. But that is where the similarity ends. As regards that of Kogi, you know that it was declared inconclusive, largely because of certain dispositions arising from inconclusiveness of the election in certain areas, but more particularly because one of the governorship candidates died. But that is after the election was declared, before the election was declared inconclusive. Again, that of Bayelsa, it is declared inconclusive because of the violence, massive violence, hostage taking, and then a snatching of ballot boxes that was reported to have taken place in the southern Ijaw local government.
Okay, if you heard one of the governorship candidates talking about the fact that southern Ijaw wasn't the only area where there was violence. He talked about other areas like Ikeremo. Does that bother you that it's just that? He says, why should southern Ijaw be the only location that was causing the inconclusiveness of the election?
Well, the answer to that can be seen in the provisions of Section 138, Section 139, and particularly Section 140 of the Electoral Act. When there is such degree of violence that can substantially mar the conduct of the election. You know, INEC conducts elections under certain principles. One, election must be seen to have been conducted in substantial compliance with the principles of the Electoral Act. Secondly, the irregularities, in the election must be such that will not substantially affect the results of the election. So that is the test. So if there is a violence of such degree as to affect the final results of the election in a substantial way, then INEC will be inclined to cancel the election. Again, if you look at the grounds for questioning the conduct of any election as spelled out under Section 138, principally you have four major grounds. One of them is that if you say the candidate was not qualified to contest the election, or secondly, if you say that the election was marred by massive irregularities, corrupt practices that will substantially affect the results of the election. Again, if you have the position that the candidate who did not score the majority of lawful votes in the election, among some other considerations. So if there's massive violence, it is impossible to have an election that will have been conducted that will satisfy in a substantial manner.
So it is not about not about the occurrence of violence.
Yes,
it's the level of magnitude of the violence.
If the violence is on a massive scale, to the extent that it will affect substantially, the key word is substantially, the results of the election.
I'm sure the legal minds will be looking at how to define the word substantial. But let's look at something else. Is it bothering you in any way that elections in two states are declared inconclusive back to back?
Well, it is worrisome. But that is not something that you can put at the doorstep of INEC, if you want to be very... It's a question of attitude. If people decide to be violent, the conduct of the election, the security situation in and around the conduct of election is outside the purview of INEC. INEC must deliver on free, fair, credible electoral process. And how can INEC deliver on this? By making adequate preparations for materials, for resources and all that, for logistics. Having done that, INEC has no way of controlling the attitude of voters. or the attitude of politicians. Some of them who may decide to take the laws into their hands, who have this attitude of win at all costs, or who see elections as do or die. So if INEC, as an unbiased empire, observes after a holistic appraisal of the situation that this is not the kind of election that should be declared conclusive, are we saying that INEC should go ahead and declare such elections conclusive? Particularly when you have a personality in the person of Mahmoud Yakubu, Professor Mahmoud, at the helm of affairs of INEC. Somebody who has zero tolerance for corruption and who's seen as tested over the years. The leadership of the current INEC, like the previous INEC, is very credible. And so they will rather ensure that elections are conducted in substantial compliance with the provisions of the Electoral Act with zero tolerance for corrupt practices than declare election conclusive in the face of massive irregularities.
Mr. Shitu, before we let you go, a number of issues were raised from that elections in Bayelsa, issues like logistics, violence, and the card reader issue. You see them recurring over and over again. Now, do you see INEC handling these problems, solving these problems before the next general elections? Or do you think we might have a recurrence of these issues?
I'm particularly very embarrassed at the frequent failure of the, card readers. And I believe it is high time INEC takes this problem up with the manufacturers. Because when you deliver equipment or you deliver any product, the assumption is that the product will be suitable for the purpose for which it is meant. Where the equipment is not suitable, you can revert back to the manufacturers and then also look in the direction of damages. Either for them to replace some of these items, because it's becoming very, very embarrassing in a situation where you find a former, president, having, being exposed to this. It can create image problems for the country, and where you see a governor who's a candidate, raising issues like that, and we can see it glaringly in the face of TV cameras that this is not something that is being made up; it's something that is real. So, what happens to the efficacy and the efficiency of these card readers? It is something INEC must take up with those in charge of manufacturing this equipment, because it's becoming very, very embarrassing.
What about the issue of logistics?
Logistics borders on preparation. INEC should be seen not to adopt a fire brigade approach to the conduct of elections. We have enough time for these elections, and we believe that given the enough time that we had, sufficient preparations that would address issues of logistics ought to have been taken. But it's certainly unacceptable for electoral officials, to be subjected to torture or kidnap or hostage-taking of electoral officials who are supposed to deliver on free, fair, and credible election. So the reports that we get from Southern Ijaw particularly regarding violence, regarding hostage-taking of electoral officials, and regarding snatching of ballot buses is certainly unacceptable. And this borders on attitude. If Nigerians want free, fair, and credible election, then they must change their attitude, their orientation. There must be greater degree of political education to get people to, realize that elections provide opportunities for the rank and file to come and serve. And if that is the mandate, there should not be a do or die.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Wahab Shitu, a legal practitioner. Thank you for coming on the news.
It's my pleasure, sir.